healthy, and by resolution, we need to maintain a minimum 1.2 coverage ratio for the revenue bonds. What that means is you take your revenue minus your operating expenses, and you divide by your debt service, and it needs to be at least 120%. If it's not, then we've defaulted. As a policy, internal policy, we try to keep that above 1.3. The rating agencies like to see it at about 1.5 or better, which just means that you have adequate revenue coming in to make sure that all your needs, your financial needs, are satisfied. I'm going to quickly just highlight a few things on here. The top line is our total revenue. Our total revenue basically is, the majority of it is based on traffic. So as the traffic ebbs and grows, that's how our revenue comes in, unless there's a tolling adjustment. And basically, I think our revenue is about 117 million. There's modest growth. I think in fiscal year 19, it's about a 120. So in here, to support our current capital program, there is no need for any kind of increase in tolls. The current revenue will support it. Our operating expenses are on this line. They were about $42 million. I will say with the lean staffing effort that we implemented, we're saving about $2.5 million in toll collection costs than we're budgeted for this fiscal year. So that's a savings that's going to extend out into the future. Over a 10-year period, that's $25 million. The net revenue, the other obligations, what that line includes is our R&R program. That's outside the revenue the revenue debt service coverage calculation. That's another obligation, but it is an obligation. I-95 acquisition. Some of you may have heard that a couple of years ago the legislature approved the sale of a section of I-95 from the highway fund to the turnpike system for $120 million. So we're paying that obligation back from the turnpike system to the highway fund. And those other obligations are factored into the bottom line, the all obligation coverage, which is a 1.0 requirement by covenant or 1.1 requirement by policy. In the future, to support the capital work, we need a $120 million bond this fiscal year coming up, so we're moving forward with $120 million new bond issuance in this fall, and another $50 million in fiscal year 14. Our legislature has granted us the legislative authority to do that, so we're able to go after and secure those bonds. It is a very, very good time to go after bonds. I think we just refunded a couple older series bonds, and based on those two refundings, which one was a $45 million, the other one was about $65 million. We didn't change the term is the same, and we saved $15 million in interest payments. So we're going to be paying $15 million on those, two series. Right now we're looking at about a 3 to 4% interest rate on bonds, which is fantastic. So the financial environment is very healthy. The construction industry is very aggressive. We're seeing lower and lower costs for construction. They routinely are coming in 5 to 10, sometimes 50% lower. The Little Bay Bridge project, for example, that was estimated to be a $55 million contract. It came in at 50. So a $5 million savings, 10%. When we talk about even small percentages over, a large project, it really is some really good money that we're saving. What's important, what I look for, and people will ask, I'm anticipating a question, well, why can't you just do additional bonding for the Dover side of Newington Dover? I look at two things. Our cash levels, they dropped down to about $8 million in ending cash in fiscal year 16. That's based on the current program that I explained without the Dover end of the Newington Dover project. Okay, so if we try to bring that project into the program, we'd go into the negative. Well, why don't you bond? Our coverage ratios are right at 1.1, right in fiscal year 17. So there's no real bonding coverage capacity to go after additional bonds for that Dover end. Really, the only way to really, include that project is if the revenue from the tolls increases just by traffic growth. That may or may not occur. Our consultant, we have a consultant that does our traffic and revenue projections that really are investment grade studies, so that they have merit with the rating agencies, because they review those studies and they scrutinize projections, and if they feel the projections are too aggressive, then they're not going to issue the bonds. Unless traffic really climbs, or unless there's added savings, we're trying to extract as much savings as possible before we go after other revenue. So that's kind of, I want to just talk a little bit about that, give everyone kind of a flavor of the program. We're trying to manage the program very closely. I think we've done a good job in terms of trying to get savings out of refunding efforts, out of operation toll collection efforts, and really in the future there's just modest growth in terms of operating costs. I think it's 2% per year. So it's not like there's a very aggressive or very high annual growth that we're projecting out for our operating side. But with these added bonds, they'll be able to support the Comeau program. We have the legislative authority to secure those bonds and complete the Comeau program. But certainly, if we need to complete any of the expanded capital efforts, it's going to need added revenue. That's the bottom line. Newington Dover. Are there any questions on the Turnpike system before I go to talk about Newington Dover specifically? Yes, sir.
Real quick one. On the toll revenue side, is there a way to capture, or have you captured commercial tolls versus what I would call POV tolls? I'm just curious what sort of ratio that is right now.
Well,
commercial tolling for commercial trucking traffic.
Yes.
What percentage of toll revenues does that represent?
That's a good question. I don't know it off the top of my head. I will tell you that commercial traffic is roughly 6% of the system, but they pay a much higher rate.
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, they pay a much higher rate, and they don't get as much of a discount. Easy Pass account holders that hold the New Hampshire account, they get a 30% discount on tolls. The commercial sector gets a 10% discount. But for example, I don't.
Toll rate,
like.
Based on access.
Yeah, for example, typical passenger car going through Hooksett, for example, pays $1. The commercial vehicle pays $2 for a tractor trailer. They'll pay $3.50. So in terms of, I don't have the breakout of that with me, but
we're capturing it.
We're absolutely capturing it. Yeah. We have a classification system that distinguishes between passenger vehicles. It's really axle based. So if passenger car has 2 axles, they charge $1. If you're towing a trailer, you pay an extra 50 cents. For commercial vehicles, they usually pay double. If it's let's say a single 2-axle box truck, they have dual tires in the back. They'll pay a $2 toll, double the toll. And for each axle, they'll also pay an additional, $1.
And those rates are posted on our website too. That's all available to the public. Anybody wants to get in there.
The percentage of
No,
well,
the toll rates.
Yeah.
Toll rates.
I understand toll rates.
Yeah.
I'm trying to convert that into a percentage of revenue.
I don't have that.
Those rates are a function of what the wear and tear you anticipate, or?
Yes.
Yeah, is there a close correlation there?
Well, I don't know if it's a close correlation, but the classification system was established many, many years ago, and in theory, trucks have more wear and tear on the system than passenger vehicles, so they pay a higher rate.
And we lose with the increase from 40 to 48 to 52 in essence, with that system as it exists. Just an observation, I'm not asking for comment.
Any other questions on the system?
Just so folks know, I have scanned this, and I will be sending it out to all the policy members. If anybody wants a printed copy, we can do that after the meeting. Yeah, let people know that we haven't forgotten that information here.
I have a report for March. The commercial revenue was $3 million. The passenger revenue was $2.6 million. That's easy.
Yeah, that's easy, and that basically communicates an awful lot of information if you think about it for a minute. So it's roughly 60%.
Roughly, 50-50. Well, that's, I'm sorry, that's just the cash. The Easy Pass revenue,
Yeah, your price.
4.1 million for passenger vehicles, 1.3 million for commercial
That's what
vehicles.
you'd expect.
So, in essence, I think you're talking overall for the month, this is just 1 month, for the month of March, 6.7 million came in Easy Pass revenue passenger, and then the trucks, I'm sorry, I gave you the wrong. The trucks for commercial transactions was 250,000 for cash. So trucks was 1.5 million, so what's that date roughly? 1.5 total million for commercial transactions.
Out of roughly 6.7. We're in the neighborhood of 20 to 25%.
30%.
So 6% of the traffic is generating,
30%.
that's what I was trying to get at.
Okay, Newington Dover. There was a lot of interest in how was this funding evolved for this project. And what I did was I went back to the 10-year plans to try to get a better understanding of how the project has been funded in the past. If you go back to 2001 to 2010 10-year plan, the project at that time, and it's in a common field, was converted from turnpike to federal aid. You need to understand the context at that time. That time, federal aid was growing. That was when T21 came in, the federal program, and there was a lot of talk about 30% additional federal funds coming into states. And New Hampshire was, really, we were thinking about what to do with all this added federal money. 30%, went from 100 million to 130 million. So at that time, it was a different environment. And at that time, the turnpike system really wasn't doing as well financially. So this project was converted from turnpikes to federal aid at that time. That's what the allocation at that time, because all of Newington Dover was, a $78 million total project. In 2003, federal aid was increased, became, basically $30 million was added for construction. So $100 million construction, $108 million total. 2005 to 14 10-year plan, the PE and right-of-way was increased. 2007 to 16, basically this is right about the time where more definitively we knew what the project was going to look like, because I think that was the time that the EIS was in progress. So the costs were slightly increased. This is a reduction, but the 10-year plan only captures those years forward. So if there were expenditures up to those years, they're not captured in the 10-year plan. They may have been already expended on the project. And then in 2009, that's when this was removed from the federal aid program, put in the turnpike program. Earmark funding for the Little Bay bridges remained. We received about $34 million in federal earmarks for the Little Bay bridges. And basically it became part of the turnpike, what I call the priority capital program, that the legislature authorized following the 2007 toll increase. At that time, $150 million of construction was dedicated to the project. And basically, the whole project was roughly $230 million. So in essence, the General Sullivan Bridge and the Dover end at that time were not funded. So what does the project look like in the recent past? 2011 to 20, the project was broken out into different construction projects. There were actually at that time, and if you were following the project, the idea was that there would be 8 construction projects, smaller type of projects. So those are identified. The total cost, in essence, was $257 million. House Bill 391, which basically, these are the Dover end and the General Sullivan Bridge, total about $87 million. I separated that out because that's what, in essence, enough revenue does not exist for. And then the current status, what we've done is we've taken a harder look at the projects and figured that doing them as larger projects as opposed to smaller and having multiple contractors in the area will be more efficient from a number of reasons, from a time standpoint, from a traffic control standpoint, and contractor interaction standpoint, and also, I think, from a administration standpoint, that the cost will be lower. So, although the total is about the same, I think if you look at some of these numbers closely, the projects that are combined, like the end contract here, the Newington end, exit 3 interchange, really that should be exit 3 and 4. That's the Newington side. That's a combination of these two M and N projects previously. The existing Little Bay Bridge rehab, that stays the same. The Dover end really is now a compilation of the Sound Wall project, the exit 6 interchange, and Dover Main Line. So it includes all 3 of those wrapped into that one. The General Sullivan Bridge rehab is the same. Also, as part of the project, the Newington Dover project, we're able to do traffic demand management mitigation elements. So there's transit that was identified as an element of the that would be paid as an offshoot of the project. Rochester Park and Ride is being paid as an offshoot of the project. Right now, those total $8.8 million. Those are also funded with CMAQ funds, but 20% matching turnpike funds. The bottom line here just basically explains that 391 provided legislative authorization without added revenue, and this amount does include $41 million of federal funds, the earmark funding, advanced right-of-way funds that we used early on, and then CMAQ funds that are being used on the park and ride and the bus options. So that's what the current picture looks like. Relative to the schedule, yes, Red?
And just so you're aware, we're fast-tracking our portion of the bus service to hopefully start at the end of June. So we're where we were thinking we were going to start in the fall, because of other changes that are going on in our operation, we're bumping that up so that we're operating at the end of June.
That'd be great. The schedule, the only thing that I want to mention is, certainly my goal is to continue to progress this project, the Dover end and the General Sullivan project also, without delay. I mean, there are sequencing that is going to be necessary as the project is constructed. Little Bay Bridge right now, once that's finished, traffic will be shifted from the existing Little Bay bridges onto new Little Bay bridges, so that's going to be wide enough to handle 2 lanes in each direction. The Newington end is slated to advertise in May of this year. If you look at this, it's a 2.5-year project. There's going to be traffic control, traffic shifting with that. Although the Little Bay rehab is listed as going in the middle of 13, next year I anticipate it going more towards the fall of 13. I think in my presentation I noted probably September timeframe that's going to go. That may even get delayed slightly more because of the traffic control that is necessary during construction. If Keith Coder was here, he'd probably explain that a little bit better because he's closely involved with the final design there. But there are shifts in traffic that obviously certain segments of the project will need to be done before those traffic shifts can occur. So there's, even if we may put out a project sooner, at that time frame may not be ready to get started because of some other element that's not finished. The Dover end, right now, here it's shown as June of 13 to advertise. That's likely going to be more in the fall, or possibly the first part of 2014. But I fully expect to try to make a case that added revenue is needed into the system. This is an important project, and to secure that added revenue prior to that time frame, so there's no further delay beyond that.
So it's still, I can't read, is it still going out to 19? The end, or is it?
That basically the facility will be done in 2016. But the except for the General Sullivan Bridge, that goes out to 2018. But I think the facility, the Spalding, will be basically fully completed by 2016.
Is the Sullivan Bridge, is the Sullivan Bridge coming down, or?
No, it's going to be rehabilitated to be a pedestrian, bicycle, recreational path across the bay.
And then 4 lanes each way on the other?
4 lanes in each way on the Little Bay bridges with full shoulders on each side. And like I mentioned earlier, those 4 lanes extend all the way from exit 3 in Newington to exit 6 in Dover, and then they'll tie into the toll plaza, which is 4 lanes in each direction. North of the toll plaza, other than the sound walls, which extend for about, I don't know, a couple thousand feet north of the toll plaza, there is not going to be any work to Spalding north of the toll plaza.
One
Yes.
question about the existing Little Bay bridges. When that's fully rehabbed, will it be, excuse me, 4 lanes without the gap in between the existing?
Absolutely, yes.
So it'll be a
It'll
solid
be-
bridge then?
Yes.
Okay.
The entire deck is going to be removed. Like the rehabilitation for the existing Little Bay bridges, there are some outdated structural elements. There's a pin and hanger connection that really doesn't meet current code. That's going to be retrofitted. And actually, the existing Little Bay bridges, they were built at 2 different times.
Yeah, that's right.
One was built in the 60s with old grade steel. All that steel is going to be removed and replaced. The one that was built in the 80s with it's not the modern steel, but it's the newer grade steel. That is sufficient to reuse and still have a long life out of it. So that's going to be retrofitting of the pin and hanger connection will be retrofitted, and that steel is going to be reused. But the entire deck is coming off. So when it's done, it's going to be one wide bridge. There will be a separation between northbound and southbound. I mean, I think
Yeah.
there'll be a couple inches. You'll have a median barrier there separating that. But other than you're going to have 4 lanes northbound, 4 lanes southbound.
What's larger urgency on the side, right?
Which shoulder? Yeah, both shoulders, 12 feet wide on each side, which don't exist today and are very dangerous.
And the General Sullivan, after that's done, there will be any painting, because it is bridge that rusts, that'll be part of the regular maintenance on the Spalding as part of.
We'd love to have the town take that over, but I don't think the town's very interested. So yes, that would be that's a turnpike. That's a turnpike asset. And really for the General Sullivan Bridge, the entire floor system is too far deteriorated. So that entire floor system, everything that you walk on today, the concrete and what supports the concrete, is all going to be removed. What's going to stay are the trusses, and they're going to be rehabilitated. They'll be sandblasted to try to remove all the rust. There is an updated inspection that is being done for that. I know that there was an underwater inspection. I haven't seen the results that was done, because there was some concern with some voids that existed in the piers. And there's going to be a more detailed inspection done. The price that's listed here is what was in the EIS, $26 million. That's just $2010. And if you project it out at 3% rate, I think it's about $31 million when it's let. I guess I'm hopeful, the department's hopeful that the cost doesn't increase, because if the cost is going to be much higher than that, then there's probably going to be some discussion whether, there's merit in really continuing to do that. Certainly the cost goes up 30, 40, 50%, and it gets to be in the $40, $50 million range, it's going to be difficult to justify. So,
Is it possible to hang the pedestrian and bicycle way below the deck on the Little Bay Bridge at that point?
to be honest with you, I don't know if that would be, I mean, one of the options during the whole planning process, the EIS process, was to remove the General Sullivan Bridge and then alongside construct the, a path that would be about, 16 feet wide. That'd be so close to the traffic.
Yeah.
It wasn't deemed, a very attractive alternative, as well as the historic elements of the General Sullivan. I mean, that kind of pushed us to the decision that was made. If the General Sullivan Bridge is too far gone, my opinion is you build some structure that replaces it on the existing pier system, so it's separate from the Spalding. But I think, I don't think that connection's going to go away.
Okay.
Can the footbridge be reconverted back to traffic use after it's been repaired?
That's a good question. That was talked about a lot. The cost to do that is quite a bit more, and it really wasn't deemed to be a good use of money. Even though I mean, you can make the argument why you're spending $26 million, almost $30 million, on a bridge that's not going to serve traffic. I think it's going to climb a lot more, because I think this design was limited to like a 10-ton capacity, that emergency vehicles can get on there, but not necessarily everyday vehicles. It becomes, right now, if you go down there, you'll see the entire approach to the General Sullivan Bridge has been removed, because that approach was so close to the Spalding Turnpike that the new bridge needed to, the approach for the new Little Bay bridges is taking up that space. So if you go there today, you'll see almost an S-curve for pedestrians to get up onto the General Sullivan Bridge today. That was constructed, yeah, you can't see it in that photo. So I guess, in answer to your question, no, it's not going to be capable of handling vehicles in the future. Our feeling is the 4 lanes in each direction with the wide shoulders on each side is going to have more than adequate capacity to address any incidents on the bridge, that the need for a secondary crossing across the General Sullivan is not necessary.
Thank you.
Have your consultants calculated how much an increase might be needed in order to pay for the remainder of these projects?
Increase.
Well, we heard you say a couple of times about a toll increase. So has someone calculated what kind of toll increase would be needed to cover current or projected projects?
We have. I mean, you're talking about maybe a 20%, 22% system-wide increase in total.
Not to belabor the point, but I can remember years and years ago when the General Sullivan Bridge was in use, people would be standing on the sidewalk along the length of it fishing. Cars, two lanes, cars would be buzzing by at 65, 70 miles an hour. I never wanted to fish there, but a lot of people did.
Well, you can fish there without having those cars buzzing by. It'll be I'm sure it'll be a much more pleasant experience. Yes.
I just want to say this has been highly informative. I really appreciate your time. I know a lot more about this, even though being from Dover, I knew most of it. This has been excellent, and thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
And the presentation, you have the presentation, so if you need it, to disseminate it, be my guest.
Great, thank you.
Good part about it, you knew all the answers that were asked.